Well, thanks, guys. We'll get that poll published to everybody so you can see the type of people that were on the call. So welcome this afternoon. My name's Peter Johnston. I'll be the host for today's session. And what we're looking at here today is the ISO 27001, the updates and changes that have happened over the last 12 months, and also what you need to know. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I've worked for Citation ISO for a year now, but don't worry, I do have a lot more experience in ISO. I started originally back in 1999-2000 with environmental consultancy and looking specifically with ISO 14001. And then as the years went on, more and more different ISO standards, and I took the leap into 27001 back in 2014. And predominantly my time now is spent either building 27001 systems for customers or auditing them. So I actually spend some of my time with the old standard and some of my time with the new standard. So I have to be in a position where I can flip back from one to the other, which always proves interesting. Before we move on, just a few admin things. So general questions, there will be a question and answer session at the end. We will be able to deal with questions there. What I would say to people is, because the 27001 standard can be implemented into any business, and because the way that it's implemented can be drastically different between the different types of organizations, if you do have a specific operational question, I've pinned my email address into the chat box. Feel free to ping me an email with your specific question on, if it does relate specifically to your business, and then we can, I'll make sure I come back to you over the next day or so with any specific answer. Yes, everybody will get a copy of the slides after the session. It'll probably take us about 24 hours to get everything done, and you'll get a copy of the slides and a copy of the presentation. So with all the admin stuff out of the way, let's move on. So before we start looking at the changes, I just wanted to give a little bit of background overview to what the 27001 is, especially when about 40% of the audience don't currently certify to 27001. So ISO 27001 is the international standard for information security. And if you get a copy of the document and read through it, it outlines all the policies, the procedures that you need that will help you protect and manage all of your data, especially your sensitive data. Okay. It's available for every organization. It's surprising just how different sizes of organization can actually implement it. If any of you have worked with me in the past, you'll know that the smallest organization I have ever implemented 27001 to is a self-employed one-man band chiropodist who didn't even own a computer. And the largest is just over 30,000 employees. So it makes absolutely no difference what type of business you are or what type of sector you are. You can actually achieve 27001. It will help you identify, protect, and address the risks. 27001, more than any other standard, really looks at risk, understanding your risks, and also your risk appetite. It can be quite interesting when implementing 27001, because it's all about understanding what those risks are to your organization and understanding whether you're comfortable and happy to accept those risks, or whether you need to look at some form of mitigation. It's also important to say that it covers much more than IT. I've worked with many clients in the past who I come to work with, and they introduce me to their IT manager, and then they say, that's it, you don't need anybody else. But as you'll see, as you look through the standard, as we go through some things today, you'll see that actually IT is only one element of it. Because it involves data and information, obviously IT is important, but so is physical security, so is people, etc. So we'll run through a few things there, and we'll take a look at those later. So what are the benefits once you've achieved 27001? The first thing is compliance. It does promote compliance because it forces you, if you like. It regulates you into a place where you have to consider legislation, regulation, and being able to demonstrate how you've aligned with them and how you've ensured that you're staying compliant. Obviously, a massive benefit is confidentiality. Risk management, as I say, it's all about understanding your risk. The number of organizations I work with that have never really considered what their risks are because they're too busy building their businesses or running their businesses to actually spend some time understanding those risks. Customer satisfaction, we see from all of our clients that once they're certified, they start to get increased customer satisfaction. Protect and enhance reputation. I think we've all seen the cyber attacks that have appeared in the newspaper, and people's balance sheets have been wiped out overnight because of the reputational damage that people can have if they do have an issue, and if they do have a data breach, is phenomenal. And the last one is a culture of security. I often say that culture is the hardest thing to change in an organization. And what 27001 does is it provides a great framework to assist you in that process. It gets everybody in the organization thinking about risk. It gets everybody involved in the organization thinking about security. And in doing so, you start to end up with a culture of security where people are always thinking that way, rather than just on the day when they're being audited. You find that actually it becomes a way of life for them. And that's a massive benefit for people. So a few people say, why has the standard changed? What was the reason for changing it? All standards change. So all the standards, whether it's ISO 9000, whether it's ISO 14000, and that rolling change normally happens around about every 6 to 9 years. Historically, we have seen 27001 actually get revised less than most of the standards. It's normally at the top end of the 9 years. And I think that's partly to do with the fact that it is so technical and so much involved. But it does get changed around about every 9 years at the moment. The reason it gets changed is to take into consideration technical changes, behavioral changes, changes to risks and threats. If you think of the landscape that we all lived in 2013 when it was last published, very few people worked from home. Very few people were using cloud environments for their data. The majority of people were storing their data in-house and had server rooms, etc. And the life that we live now is completely different, especially since COVID. The hybrid working or the working from home is a significant difference now. So that's really why the standards do get changed. And one of the main reasons to change the 27001 at the moment is to align it to the updated version of Annex SL. So there have been very minor changes since 2013 in Annex SL, which is the standard, if you like, the way that all of the different ISO standards are written. And what this new version does is it ensures that it takes those into account. So that's the reasons why the standard required changing. So looking briefly about what is changing, the important bit, if you like. So I've put on there the old version, the new version next to each other. So the old version was released on the 1st of October 2013, and this one was released on the 25th of October 2022. So pretty much right on the 9 years. The original one, or the 2013 version, was to the Annex SL standard structure, whereas now we're working to the revised Annex SL structure, which is very slightly different. At the end of your management clauses, you have, as everyone will probably be aware, you have your Annex A. And the Annex A in the old version used to have 14 sections. That's now been reduced considerably. They've put them into 4 sections, but this time they've called them themes. And we'll run through exactly what they are and everything else. But just to give you an idea, those 4 themes are organisation, people, physical, and technological. And each one of those has a number of controls in, which all add up to 93. The old Annex A used to have 114 controls. But don't think that you are getting away with anything, because even though there is less controls, there was nothing taken out of the original. We only added to it. So what else has changed? In the new standard, you now have what are called attributes, or I've put the hashtag before it because the way that they are designed is that you will use them like hashtags. And we'll be able to run through what that is today and put a bit more meat on the bones to give you some understanding of how to use it. The other thing that changed in the 2013 version, there was a lot of repetition, whereas in the new version, we're looking at it being a lot more concise. So that's the changes. Let's start to have a look at how we break those down in more details. So first of all, changes to the management system. Most people I've spoken to since this standard was published only want to talk about Annex A, because that's where the majority of the changes happened. But I think it's really important just to take a few minutes to look at the changes to the management system. I've had a number of clients over the years who don't even think about the management system, especially ones that are very tech-based, very IT-based. They spend all of their life concentrating on the Annex A controls and forgetting that actually they have the management system to deal with as well. So even though they have only been subtle changes, I'm going to run through what those subtle changes are and how they affect you. One thing I just want to point out is I won't be running through the standard from start to finish. We wouldn't have time to do it today. So I'm only concentrating on the bits that have changed. So if there's anything that I don't cover today, the reason is because it hasn't changed. So clause 4, what's changed here? There's 2 bits that have changed. For these slides, you'll see that they're coloured. The comments in there are either in an orange colour or a pink colour. If it's new, it's in pink. If it's just been reworded, it's in orange. So for all of the management system clauses, it just makes life a bit easier when you receive the presentation, and you'll start to see whether something's just been reworded or whether something is a new item. So I've put them as 2 different colours for you. So 4.2 has changed. The wording of section 4.2b has been reworded very slightly. And then there's been this additional one. Which of these requirements will be addressed through the information security management system? So 4.2c has been added. And what I find interested parties is something that clients don't spend too long thinking about. But as I continually say to people, it is the foundation of everything that comes after it. If you don't understand who your interested parties are, how can you then build a management system that considers all of the risks and all of the security of those people? So the first stage of any system is to actually identify who your interested parties are. And the section C there, which of these will be addressed through the information security management system? Because there are some things that won't be, but there are some things that you're going to have to. And I think one of the things they're trying to push here is to make sure that you continually go back to your interested parties and review it. To give you an idea, you might have an interested party with a supplier, and you might have an NDA. And therefore that's been addressed through the information security management system. But if that NDA was signed, agreed and discussed at the point of sale or the purchase, whichever way, once you get to the operational phase, 2 weeks or 2 months or even 2 years later, if that NDA isn't brought up, if it isn't passed through the chain, then you might find that people are dealing with something that they don't fully understand because they haven't read all the details. So I think clause C is very much trying to make sure that you don't just set and forget your interested parties, so to speak. You actually think about them and how they're going to be dealt with through the information security management system moving forwards. Section 4.4, very little change there. It says that you shall establish, implement, maintain and continually improve your management system, including the processes needed for their interaction. So very, very little change from what you would actually do, if you like. It's a small minor change to the wording, but physically what you do as an operation activity is not really going to change at all. Clause 5, there is no changes. That's why we've skipped over it. Clause 6, a few changes here. There's some minor wording changes, which I've put there in yellow for you to be able to understand. So, for example, it used to say the justification for excluding any controls, whereas now it says the justification for exclusion of any of the controls. So some of these rewords can be really, really minor. And that's why, as I say, I wanted to point them out to you, but actually as you come to run your management system, the way that you operate is probably very, very similar with these clauses. Also within clause 6 that's changed, clause 6.2, information security objectives and planning to achieve them. A couple of things that have been added in there: be monitored and be available as documented information. The old standard used to talk about retaining documented information to demonstrate the objectives, whereas now it's actually saying that they should be available as documented information. I think it's quite easy to do that. The only thing that I would say to clients who are dealing with 6.2 and security objectives is don't think so narrowly about information security objectives. I work with a number of people over the years who feel very blinkered about information security objectives, and it leads them to the point where they start having an objectives register that says, I want to achieve ISO 27001, or I want to maintain 27001, or I want to continue with 0 data breaches. And I say to them, think wider, think holistically of the whole business. Are you looking at recruiting new people? Are you looking at migrating your data to the cloud? Are you looking at taking on a new building or a new big contract? Because actually, all those changes are going to have an effect on your information security management system. So it's worth thinking holistically about what do we want to do as a business and including them within your objectives, because then they'll be at the forefront of everything you think about. They'll get monitored more frequently, they'll get reviewed more frequently, and it will actually make a lot more sense to you as you start to build your management system through. So what else has changed? This is the first one, which is a new clause. So 6.3, brand new clause, planning of changes. When people first see this clause, they say, oh, well, it used to be in clause 8.1 operations, or it used to be in the Annex A as 12.1.2 change management. I think the importance of moving it into clause 6 specifically, because it is still within the Annex A and it is still within clause 8.1. But the difference by putting it into clause 6 is what you're saying is that you should plan the changes during the planning phase of a project, not just deal with changes when you're in an operational phase, but actually when you're in the planning phase. So when you're sitting there planning the next change, planning the next way you're going to develop a project or deliver a project, when you're in that planning stage, if there are changes, if there are ways that you're going to do things differently, it's important that you start to deal with them. And that's why this clause, I feel, has been added in at this point, just to put a bit more focus on it for you. Clause 7, quite straightforward with regards to communication. They've removed the section that used to say who shall communicate and the processes by which communication shall be affected. And I'm really glad about that. It used to give people an absolute nightmare when they used to have to try and identify who was going to communicate stuff. But they've now put in how to communicate. And I think that's quite important. It just makes your life a bit easier, makes it a bit more simple to build your management system, and it shows where the focus is. So clause 8, operational plan and control. So there's a few things here. If you see on the second paragraph, you've got documented information shall be available. It used to read the organisation shall keep documented information. So hardly any change there. But I think that it's been necessary to do it to try and, again, align it more with the revised Annex SL. One thing I do want to point out to you is the last section there, it says the organisation shall ensure that externally provided processes. Now, it used to talk about contracted processes, etc., whereas now it's externally provided processes, products and services. With 27001, everybody immediately jumps to, the cloud provider or the hosted provider or the software developer who is our external developer. You need to think a lot wider than that. I'll give you a perfect example of cleaners. If you work in an office and you have a cleaner come in every evening, they are a potential risk from an information security point of view. They're probably in the office for a couple of hours. They're probably not monitored. So when we talk about ensuring that all externally provided processes that are relevant to the ISMS, just make sure that you are considering everything when you're working on that. And as I say, things like cleaners is a perfect example of something that you wouldn't initially think of. Moving on to clause 9, there's been a few changes within clause 9. So first of all, clause 9.1, it talks about the method selected should produce comparable. I think that's mainly, apart from obviously designed to align with the Annex SL, but it's trying to make sure that you can compare. It's looking at trends. It's looking at analysis. It's quite easy to publish a report every year and say, this is how our year went. But actually to be able to compare to last year and say, has things gone better? Have things gone worse? Have we identified any new risks? It's really pushing you down the plan, do, check, act role of what is the basis of every ISO management system, by making sure that you compare to how you were doing before. And then, as I say, the last bit with regards to documented information, just a very, very minor wording change. Clause 9.2, internal audit. It looks like it's a big change because 9.2 is a new clause and 9.2.2 is a new clause. But actually, there is no changes whatsoever in this. All they've done is they've taken the exact text that was in it before and they've made it into two sub categories now, two sub clauses rather than all as one clause. So it's important when you're putting together your program of internal audits to make sure that you do remember now that there is two sub clauses. But for the actual work that you undertake in doing your internal audits, it's exactly the same as it was before. Performance evaluation. Again, it's 3 new clauses now. When I first looked at this, I was slightly puzzled as to why they changed it and brought it out as 3 separate ones. But actually, again, what you'll find is that there's very, very little change. It's all about just separating it out into the sub-clauses to put focus on it. I like the fact that 933 now talks about results, whereas it used to talk about outputs. And outputs were sometimes people would think of just, the piece of paper after the management review minutes, whereas the management review results are, what actually did we identify? What did we find? So I think the slight changing on the wording of that does help you focus. I think it makes it easier for people to understand. And also by putting in the additional clause of 932, it ensures that you've got changes in needs and expectations of interested parties. So again, it's focusing you back to that interested parties at the very, very beginning that you did, to make sure that you consider it each year when you do your management review, or every 6 months or every 3 months, however frequently you do them. So moving on to clause 10. Clause 10 improvement. Very, very little difference here, apart from the fact that they've actually swapped positions. So now 10.1 continual improvement, used to be 10.2, and non-conformity and corrective action is now 10.2 and used to be 10.1. There is a very, very minor change to the wording, but nothing consequential. The actual moving of the clauses and having continual improvement first, I think, is again trying to focus people. What we're trying to do is we're trying to drive continual improvement, and we do that by identifying our non-conformities, dealing with corrective actions and learning from them. Whereas before, people were very focused on their non-conformances and they were forgetting the overall philosophy of continual improvement. So I think by making that one 10.1, it focuses you, it makes you think about it more. So that's all the management system run through. As I said at the start, the management system changes are pretty minor. They are important. Don't feel like you can just forget about them and not have to do anything. You are going to have to change things like your internal audit programs, maybe some of your internal audits that you've done before. And it is important to realize that within the management side of things, you're not able to exclude anything. So it's actually really imperative that you do deal with everything that's within the management system, as well as dealing with what's in the Annex A. Don't feel like the Annex A is all the technical stuff and therefore we're just going to deal with Annex A. Make sure you're covering all of your management system as well. So running through some of the changes that have happened within the Annex A. As I said at the start, although the number of controls has reduced from 114 to 93, nothing was removed. All controls are now aligned into the 4 themes: organisational, people, physical and technological. And some of the changes that have happened, we've got 35 controls that remain the same. All that happened was changing their control number. 23 have been renamed, just to help you ease of understanding. One has been divided into 2. That was clause A1823, technical compliance review. And that's now been separated into A5.36, which is compliance with policies, rules and standards. And also into A8.8, which is management of technical vulnerabilities. So that one has actually been divided into 2 for greater clarity. There's 57 that got squashed down into 24. A perfect example of that was A1112 used to talk about physical entry controls, and A1116 used to talk about delivery and loading areas. If you actually went into the detail of what was included in both of those clauses, you would see that they were pretty much identical. So what they've done is they've merged those 2 now, got rid of the repetition, and it's now called A7.2 physical entry. And then lastly, and what we're going to look at today, is there are 11 new controls that have been added. So what we'll do now is we'll have a look at each of the ones that have been added in a little bit more detail. So the first one we find as we run through that's new is Annex A 5.7, threat intelligence. Again, I think it's something that was always within the standard. We always thought about threats. We always thought about risks, but having now a dedicated control talking about threat intelligence, it's making you think about what the threats are out there. So you should be considering things like strategic threats, as in what's changing in the landscape of the the system or within the organization. Tactical threats, so things like how are hackers now gaining entry, or how are thieves now gaining entry. Start thinking about things like tools and technologies. What can we use? How can we use it? How can we deliver it? And also operational threats. So information about your specific organization or your operation of your organization. Some people at this stage will actually develop what's known as a threat table. And the idea behind a threat table is to even more focus the mind. If you go out and you spend some time doing some threat intelligence and you identify a number of potential threats, you could write it down on a register, and then you could make sure that you keep monitoring it. At the end of the day, I always say to clients, it's not a statutory requirement. It's something that if you believe would be useful for you, then definitely go ahead and build it. What I would also say, though, as a caveat, is sometimes if you write things down, because of the way that the landscape changes so quickly, because of the way that the threats are raised and then they get closed out by new software that closes out the issues, you might find that you're actually continually updating your threat register. You might find that by the time you finish writing it, it's actually changed. So don't feel like you have to write a threat table or threat register, but it is there as an option for you if you want. Another thing with threat intelligence, some people pay for really expensive services. There are third-party companies out there who will do threat intelligence for you, and they'll do an absolutely phenomenal job. But there are lots of free stuff out there as well. You know, you can register for the National Cyber Security Centre. You literally click on their website, load up the details, and you'll receive an email, depending on the size of your business. Sometimes it's weekly, sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly. But they have different information that goes out to different types of businesses. Another thing that I say regularly to people is if you are going to register with the National Cyber Security Centre, it might be worth registering for all of their different types of category. So, for example, if I registered for the ones that are relevant to me and us here as Citation, that would be great. I'd receive all the threat intelligence on the kind of things that are going to affect us. But by registering for all of the different ones, the non-profit, the small organisation, the very large organisation, I'm starting to get a good picture of what's actually affecting my customers and my suppliers. So even though it's not a particular threat for me, maybe, I'm actually starting to understand what could be a threat to them. So I would definitely recommend spending a couple of minutes registering on there. There's also another one called OWASP, which is the Open Web Application Security Project, and they publish a list of known threats, and that could be quite useful for people. So that's threat intelligence. Not surprising, in 2013, cloud services were not included, and in the 2022 version, it is very much included. I think the majority of people are now involved in one shape or form with cloud services, so to make sure it's got its own control, I think is really important. The kind of things that you're going to have to think about with cloud services, though, is it's not just what risk there are once you're operating. You need to be thinking about it during that planning stage, at the point of buying it, identifying it, also migrating your data across. You have to think about all the risks involved there, and you have to make sure that you've got and maintain policies to maintain that control. I regularly hear from people say, oh, I use AWS or I use Microsoft Azure for my cloud services, and they're absolutely brilliant and they've got loads of security, and therefore I do next to nothing. I think it's really important to say that if you went and bought new doors and windows for your house with amazing locks, it doesn't secure your house unless people actually use them. And I say that to clients about cloud services. The likes of AWS, the likes of Microsoft Azure, they have absolutely phenomenal cloud services. They have absolutely phenomenal amounts of security systems that can be used. But unless you start using them, unless you start implementing them, then it doesn't matter how good they are, they're not going to help you. So start to think about what you do in the cloud. Start to think about how that could potentially affect you. Don't just think about the big stuff. Don't just think about the AWSs and that. Think about your other programs. Think about your other applications that you might use for finance, or you might have a small package that you deal with for HR. How are those cloud services getting backed up? How are those cloud services getting managed? What risks are involved in them? So think about all of your cloud services. So the next one is 530. Although it's classed as a new control, business continuity was very much in the old standard, but now it has a specific control just for ICT readiness for business continuity. So one thing that people might want to consider here is a business impact assessment. It has to be relative to the size of your organization. If you're 2 people working from a single room, then you're probably not going to invest a lot of time and effort in doing a business impact assessment. But if you're quite a large organization, if you've got quite diverse departments, then what a business impact assessment will do is it will ask the individual departments to generate a BIA that will start to say, what do we have to care about? How long could we do without them? And how quickly and how efficiently are we going to have to be back online? And how would that potentially affect our business? Because what you often find if you're running a management system is you don't understand exactly how it might affect each department. So asking them to do a business impact assessment, feed those business impact assessments back to you, then you will be in a much better place to be able to put together your business continuity. Moving on to a different theme completely now, so into the clause A7s, 7.4 physical security monitoring. Be aware that this might not be relevant. There's a lot of people who actually, although you can't exclude items from your management clauses, you can exclude them from your Annex A if they're not relevant to you. So if you are 100% remote working and you don't have a physical office, then it may be that 7.4 is actually not applicable, and you can record that within your statement of applicability, and then you don't need to consider it. You just need to check every year during your management review meeting that it is still correct, that it is still not applicable. If it is applicable for you, consider the kind of monitoring that you want to do. So things like physical access. So do you have locks on the doors? Do you have key fobs? Do you have alarms? Have you got CCTV? And if you do put CCTV in, or if you do have CCTV, ensure that you register with the ICO, because you'll find that you'll need to register with the ICO if you are taking CCTV images and storing them. 8.9, configuration management, something that I've always been really keen on myself, something that's very difficult in organically grown businesses when they're first starting out on their 27,001 journey normally. And this is about standardizing things. Have a standard template for what does a laptop look like, what software should it have, what software shouldn't it have, what's the consistent hardware, what do we use for our virus protection. Because if you have everybody in the organization with a standard configuration, it will reduce your risks considerably, and it will make managing those risks considerably easier. So think about putting together a network diagram that says how things work. Consider putting together a build specification that says what are we actually going to specify when we build a laptop or give somebody access, and think about approved software. If you can have a list of approved software that you work from, it'll be much easier for you then when you come to deliver new assets and deploy them to the team. 8.10, information deletion. Something that wasn't really included in the last one. I believe it's been brought in predominantly because of the GDPR compliance and to make sure that the two align very closely. When you consider your GDPR requirements, one of the things in there is to talk about how long you're going to keep data for. So what is the retention period? And when you get to the end of that retention period, what are you going to do with it? So 8.10 will actually make you start to think about how you're going to deal with that information deletion. You know, some people will take a physical backup of all data and stick it in the cupboard and forget about it for 10 years. You need to be considering, if you've put in your GDPR information and your paperwork that you're going to, for example, get rid of all your financial documents after 6 years plus current, then you have to be considering how you're going to get rid of that. Are you going to just work on deletion? Are you going to work on overwriting? Are you going to work on an external organization who can actually do the data cleansing for you? So making sure that you consider the options, the risk involved, and then find the option that's right for you. Data masking, another one that is, in my opinion, been brought in simply because of GDPR. There's things within the GDPR where we talk about anonymizing data. And what data masking looks at is how you're going to do that. So some people will anonymize the data. So for example, you would change the name from Peter Johnston to user one. You have pseudo-anonymization, which is where you might change Peter Johnston on a document to Fred Smith, and therefore it has no relation to the person. You could look at just encryption, but it's important that you consider, if you are going to need to data mask, how are you going to do it, and how you've dealt with that within your GDPR paperwork, and said that you're going to deal with it. 8.12, data leakage prevention, probably the biggest one that I discuss with clients. It's the one that really is completely new, and is the one thing that probably makes the most changes for people. So data leakage prevention is simply that. We don't want data leaking from your organization. It's a risk to everybody. And depending on the type of organization you are, whatever is relative and appropriate for you, you can look at different ways of dealing with that. So there are things like firewalls as an absolute basic. You've got things like even minimizing access to the data in the first place. You know, if you work in an organization with 20 people, do they all really need access to everything? Or should you be more segmented and only make sure that people receive information or receive access to the information that they really need to do their job? There is specific technology and applications out there. There's hundreds of different pieces of kit out there. Microsoft Purview is one that we see time and time again now, because people are going down the Microsoft packages and therefore implement it. But there is lots of different software. There's lots of different third-party services who will actually deal with data leakage prevention for you. Monitoring activities, again, has to be proportional to your organization. You must consider the risks and threats, and it can be manual as well as technological. So a lot of people will think of monitoring activities as, you know, fancy computer systems that monitor all the different logs and send exception reports to us if something's gone wrong. At the opposite end of the scale, I worked with a client not very long ago who was a domiciliary care provider. And what they did was they monitored their staff as to when they'd logged in and when they'd logged out of their applications. Because they knew if they were working Monday to Friday, they shouldn't be logging in at weekends. Why would you need to? So it can be something as simple as a manual check to say, have people logged in when they're not supposed to? Is there a reason why they're logging in when they're not supposed to? At the opposite end of the spectrum, there's fantastic pieces of software that will draw you lovely graphs and dashboards and send you loads of exception reports. So that's, if you like, both ends of the spectrum. But it's about working out what's right for you and making sure that you implement what's right for you. The next one is web filtering. The initial stage of this would normally revolve around your acceptable use policy. What do you think is acceptable for your organization, for your team to actually be dealing on the web? You know, do you trust them? Is it a small team and you give them access to everything? Are you the kind of organization who needs access to lots of things? You know, some of these organizations that are dealing with, for example, social media marketing, if you start to put in too much web filtering, they wouldn't actually be able to do their job. So work out what's right for you. But wherever possible, you should be looking to reduce the exposure to malicious content. You are expected to implement a control and deal with it as a part of your policy. And the one bit that a lot of people miss is the last bullet point on there, staff training. You can develop any piece of policy, but unless you train the team so that they understand how it affects them, it's not really going to do much help. So make sure that you've worked out what's right for you, make sure you've implemented what's right for you, and make sure that you've then trained the staff so that they're aware of what's needed. And the last new one is 8.28, secure coding. Again, if you read the standard 27001, or if you read the Code of Practice 27002, there's a lot of good stuff in there that will help you implement this control. But you need to be considering it before, during, and after coding activities. So where are we going to store things? You need to consider things like third-party applications. You need to consider things like open source software. A lot of secure coding is done by third-party coders, third-party developers. So you need to consider that. But there is a lot of really detailed information, especially within the 27002 document, that will really help you with this. And if there is no code and if there is no development whatsoever, then obviously this one would be not applicable and you wouldn't have to worry about it. All you would have to do is to show whenever you have a management review meeting that you're still comfortable that it's not applicable to you. Don't just think because we put it as not applicable 5 years ago, we can forget about it. It's very much about making sure that you reevaluate that and make sure that it's still not applicable. So that's it for all the new controls. Before we go, one thing I did just want to touch on is about attributes. This is something that's really new. It's probably the biggest change that I've seen in an ISO standard for a long time, because it's completely a new idea behind it. By moving all of those 114 controls from 14 sections down into 93 controls in 4 themes, they have made it a lot easier for you to be able to track things, to be able to find things, etc. But attributes brings an even bigger level to it. So what you've got is you've got 5 principles of attributes, and they are control type, information security properties, cybersecurity concepts, operational capabilities, and security domains. What you've then got is you will have what are officially called attributes, but what are affectionately just known as hashtags, because we should put a hash before it. And you've got there, within control type, you've got 3: preventative, detective, and corrective. For information security properties, we've got the CI and A that we've known for years and is very much the principle of the standard. And as you go through the concepts and the capabilities and the domains, you'll see a list of different hashtags there. 2 things to note on this. You don't have to use them. It's been written within the documentation. You can use it. It can be really, really useful. It can help assign things to teams. It can help people find things quicker. Even though all the Annex A controls are spread now over only 4 themes, you will still have one from one theme that is affected by something that's in a different theme. And by using attributes, you can actually link them. You can just make the story a lot more concise, if you like. So it is good practice to use them, but it isn't compulsory. If you don't want to use them, if you're not happy with them, feel free to leave them out. The other thing is, it's not an exhaustive list. Those are the ones that are suggested. You can have your own. You can write your own completely if it makes more sense to you. I've seen people who hashtag different controls based on which department is actually going to take responsibility for that. So you can play around with attributes. It gives you quite a lot of license to do what you want, if you like, license to make your management system work better for you. So that's attributes. So that's the end of running through all the different changes. Hopefully that gives you a brief insight as to what's changed. If you are certified to the old standard, don't worry. If you're certified with ourselves, we will be in touch and we'll be able to discuss the upgrade for you. If you're in a rush, if you decide, having watched this, that you want to get some more information about it, as I said, my email address is pinned to the top of the chat. Feel free to reach out, drop me a message, tell me about your personal circumstances, your organisation, where you currently are in your journey. We can have a chat about what's right for you. And then if and when it's ready for you to move to the new standard, or if you're going to go for the new standard from scratch, I can put you in touch with the right people who can talk you through that. So feel free to get in touch. The general number is at the bottom of the page there, which you'll see when you receive the slides. There is also the sales email address there, and pinned in the top of the chat, you'll also see the one for marketing. But as I say, mine's there. If you've got any questions whatsoever, feel free to reach out. And that's everything that I've got for you. So the final bit, we've got 10 or 15 minutes to spare. If anyone does have any questions, if they've put any in the chat, I know my colleague Ellie's been dealing with them. Then we'll run through them now. Would pen testing and mitigating the results of the test fulfill 5.7? Probably not. So threat intelligence, I hesitate because it can vary depending on what else you've got going on within your organization. So it's not a definite no. But my personal opinion is pen testing and mitigating results is after the event. You've already had the threat. You've exposed your business to a potential risk. You've done the pen testing to identify what that risk is, and then you've mitigated it. What threat intelligence 5.7 is doing is very much getting you to think about it at the outset. So understanding what the threats are that are in the marketplace, rather than ones that are actually just affecting you at the moment, with the intention of trying to identify them before they become a risk to you, before they become a threat to you. I hope that answers that question. How does the transition process work? Really good question. Depends on who your awarding body is, whether you're with ourselves or whether you're with a different awarding body. I can only talk about the way that we handle it. So there is 2 processes that we can do for you. One process is where we hold your hand on the journey. So we spend some time with you looking at your 2013 management system, looking at your statement of applicability, building your new one that's compliant with the 2022 standard, so that you're there in a position to get certified to 2022. We also have a number of clients who very much can drive it themselves. You know, there are some clients who have very, very experienced management teams in place, and they're able to put their own system in. And if you are one of those, if you have been able to build yourself your new statement of applicability, if you've looked at the 11 additional controls and you've either excluded them or you've met the requirements, then you can contact the office. And what we would do is we would change your next annual audit into what's known as a compliance audit, and then you would actually get certified to the new standard. Leslie, if you want to reach out to me specifically, if you are registered with us, then I can have a look at your details. I'll have a look at where you are in your cycle, and I'll be able to give you much better advice as to whether you should be thinking about it now or in the near future. The one thing I would say to everybody is don't leave it 3 years. There is a transition period, which is 3 years. A lot of companies kick it down the road until the last 5 minutes and then wonder why they're struggling to get it done in time. I'm never a fan of doing it in the first 6 months, because that's when everybody is trying to find their feet, learn what they, learn the good bits and the bad bits. We're now out of that period. Now is a perfect opportunity to consider transition. Any time in the next 12 months is a good time to do it. So yeah, Leslie, reach out, send me your details, and I can take that offline with you personally. Do we need to make changes to our ISO manual, or will this be something that will be distributed to us as a new version? Denise, that again comes back to which way you decide to move forward. So if you were going to do it as a self-service, if you like, then you would need to make the changes to your ISO manual. You would need to make the changes to your statement of applicability, and you would need to implement them. However, if you contract us to do that transition period with you, as I say, we would spend a couple of days where we deal with all of those things for you. And we make sure that you've got all up-to-date documentation for your management system, and also for your Annex A statement of applicability and everything that's needed with it. So depending on where you are in your cycle, depending on how you choose to move forward. Similarly with the last question, Denise, ping me a quick email. I can catch up with you offline and make sure that I give you the correct advice that's right for you. What's the advice on using attributes? So my advice has changed, I'll be honest, over the last 6 months. When attributes first came out, I wasn't a huge fan. I kind of even felt maybe it's a little bit gimmicky. For most of the management systems that we were working on in the very early days, we were just putting the bare basics, the bare minimum, or we were taking the ones that were recommended within the 27002. Over the last few months, I've started to see just how useful they can be, especially when people start to think about their own attributes. By being able to pin down who's responsible by using an attribute, or which team is responsible, or even how frequently we're going to amend it or review it, I think attributes actually makes your life so much simpler. So I'm actually a huge fan of attributes now. I would say to everybody, it is a little bit of a, change is difficult. It's not something that you pick up and run with straight away and think's absolutely amazing. It's going to take you a bit of time, push through it, and you'll probably find it's good. We were first certified in 2022 on a 3-year cycle. Will the new standard be applied after year 1 or year 3? Tom, we can look at doing your upgrade to the 2022 standard, because the standard only came out towards the back end of the year. We then had to develop all of our internal documentation before we were able to certify people to that. We did it as quickly as we could, and it took us a couple of months. If you were certified to the 2013 standard, then we can upgrade you to the 2022 standard at any point. It would be sensible to either do it in year 1 or year 2, would be my personal view. Again, without understanding the size of your organisation, the complexity of your organisation, and how well you've got on with it since you got certified, I wouldn't really be able to give you a great answer. Reach out to me, can have a look at it. If you're finding that you're really enjoying your standard, that you understand, that you've got your head around ISO, that you've got your head around 27001, there's nothing to stop you going for it at your first annual audit at the end of year 1. If you're struggling with it, it might be something that's possibly worth keeping to the old standard for another year and then looking at changing at the end of year 2. What were the resources, services that we should consider? So a couple of things that I said within threat intelligence. So one of them is the NCSC website. If you can't find it, then feel free to ping me a message, and I'll be able to send you the details of it. Threat intelligence is something that it has to be very relative to you, Larry. If you are a one-man band electrician, then the amount of time and effort that you put into threat intelligence is going to be completely different to if you are Barclays Bank, let's say. So understanding who you are, what size you are, will change the kind of things that you look to put in place. But as a basic, some of the things you can consider, as I say, is the National Cybersecurity Centre, so NCSC. When you go on there, you'll see that you can register for their updates, and it will ask you what size of organisation you are. Are you a small sole trader? Are you a small to medium enterprise? Are you a large enterprise? I suggest you go on 3 times and register 3 times and get all the information. That's really useful. So that would be the first place I would probably start. And then depending on the size of the organisation, whether you need to consider different pieces of software that are out there or different services from third parties, depending on your risk appetite, and the threats that you're currently seeing, that would be more information that I would need to be able to give you more, if you like, feedback on that. In a flex office space scenario, WeWork, who is responsible for technology-related ISO controls? Does it sit with the office provider or the tenant? Do the tenant need to install their own firewall? Adam, I don't mean to sound like I'm being evasive, but it's all about risk and risk appetite. If you were a consultant who was helping people, design houses, let's say you're an architect sitting in a WeWork and you had very little confidential information, you had very little amounts of data that was at risk, then using the WeWork network is probably perfectly fine. For managing that network, obviously that is WeWork's responsibility, and it would become your responsibility by considering the clauses that deal with third parties. If you were a data cruncher, if you were working for one of the large organizations where you're actually sitting there with thousands of pieces of data every day, lots of really sensitive information, let's say you worked with the NHS and you were dealing with lots of people's personal records, then it would be a case to sit there and say, is it realistic to think that the risk and the risk appetite is suitable for you to use the WeWork network? And at which point you probably would look to put your own firewall in. To be ISO compliant, what I look for as an auditor is I look to see if you've done that task. Have you considered the risk? If I go to a client and they say, I've put my own firewall in, or if they say, WeWork have put a firewall in, my initial reaction is always, why did you decide that was suitable? Have you considered the risk? Have you considered the mitigation? Have you considered any form of your risk appetite, the potential outcome, the potential threat? And if you've done that task and you've decided that the WeWork firewall is perfectly acceptable, that's what I'm looking for, and therefore that would be ISO compliant. If you've done none of that, if you've just signed up to WeWork because it was free, then I would be potentially asking more questions to see whether you're ISO compliant, not necessarily because the WeWork might not be right, but because you haven't considered whether it is right or wrong. We are due our next audit in September. Should we be looking to upgrade before this, or would you recommend waiting until afterwards? James, ping me a message. Let me have a look at your details. Let me have a look at how long you've had your system. Let me have a look at where you currently are. Have you had any previous non-conformances? Let me have a chat with you. Are you getting on with the system? Are you happy with it? Do you enjoy it? Do you understand it? And if all of that is yes, then there's no reason to stop you going for it in September. If you're struggling with it, if you've had previous non-conformances, if you're not enjoying it, if you're not finding it too easy, then I might suggest that you stay where you are, and we resolve the underlying issues before we start to change things and make it even more difficult for you, so to speak. So ping me details. I'll have a look at it for you, and I'll come back to you. I'm just aware I've said that to quite a few people. So if I don't come back to you today, please forgive me, but I promise I will be back to everyone over the next day or so. And the last thing I just want to point out, when people talk about the old standard and the new standard, I actually, because I spend half of my time working with the old standard and half of my time working with the new standard, I've got a really, really simple matrix that I built in Excel that just maps all of the controls one way and the other. If it would be useful to any of you, ping me a quick email. I'll fire you over a copy. It's nothing complicated. It's a simple Excel table that shows you where it used to be in the old standard and where it is in the new one. And it helps you understand the ones that have been collated, the ones that are new, etc. And I'm more than happy to ping a copy of that to everybody. Just drop me a quick email and I'll make sure you get one. If that's everything from everyone, that's perfect timing, because we've got about 1 minute and 15 seconds left. So I just want to say thank you for everyone today. I fully understand that ISO 27001 is an absolutely huge topic. We could talk about it for weeks, not an hour. I'm also aware that it gets implemented completely differently to different organisations. So if the things that I went through today are not specifically relevant to yours, reach out. I'll be able to catch up with you privately and we can make sure. And if that's everything, I just want to say thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to catching up with you on the next one.